States has imposed an ironclad blockade that grows more powerful by the day. From the Gulf of Oman to the open oceans, our Navy is enforcing this blockade without hesitation or apology.
At 311, 42 miles west of Bandar Abbas, 28 Americans crossed into the black edge of a fortified IRGC command belt guarded by 96 men, 14 cameras, and a commander Tehran believed untouchable. Their objective was not a building, it was the man inside it. They had 74 minutes before the mission window collapsed and 22 minutes before a failsafe would begin wiping everything beneath the compound. 4 signals were missing. The numbers didn't match, and 1 black binder was never listed in the original intelligence. They thought it couldn't be taken. They were wrong. The first mistake Iran made was believing the mountain protected them. The second was believing the Americans were coming for revenge. They weren't there for revenge. They were there for proof. At 3:14, the desert outside Minab was silent enough to hear loose gravel shift under a boot. Above it, the Zagros ridgelines cut the moon into pieces, and below it, a buried facility known only as Station 19 kept breathing through vents disguised as broken irrigation wells. What they didn't know was that the facility had already betrayed itself. 6 weeks earlier, a maintenance convoy left Bandar Abbas with 7 trucks. Only 6 returned. That missing truck led analysts to a road that officially didn't exist, a tunnel map that had been erased from provincial records, and a name that appeared on 3 separate encrypted ledgers. General Arman Sadeghi, the IRGC's top field chief for external missile coordination, the man behind a chain of shipments, proxy transfers, and command orders that Washington had tracked but never been able to touch. Now, this wasn't a raid. It was a countdown. Now at 3:17, the first timer started, 74 minutes. Outside, one element watched the northern road. At the same time, another tracked heat signatures inside the outer compound. Underground, a third team waited for confirmation that Sadeghi was still inside. That confirmation never came. Instead, the first open loop snapped tighter. The thermal count showed 112 people inside the restricted zone. The intelligence estimate said 96, 16 extra bodies were unaccounted for, and 4 expected signals were missing entirely. The problem wasn't getting in, the problem was understanding what they had just walked into. By 3:21, Tehran still had no public warning, no sirens, no statement, no emergency broadcast. Only a red phone on the second floor of a communications annex began flashing without anyone picking it up. That was the mistake. The defenders believed the threat would come from the sky or the sea. They had spent months hardening radar angles, coastal batteries, and anti-drone nets. But this pressure came from everywhere at once. Not captured, not reclaimed, gone. At 3:24, the first silent alarm triggered inside the lower command level. It should have sealed 3 blast doors, only 2 moved. The third remained open for 9 seconds, and 9 seconds was enough to change the mission. If you want to see what they found inside that open corridor, hit like right now, because this is where the mission stopped being clean. Sadeghi had built his reputation on redundancy. 2 offices, 3 sleeping rooms, 5 decoy travel routes, 9 men who looked enough like him from a distance to make targeting nearly impossible. For years he survived because nobody knew which version was real until after he had already vanished. But at Station 19, the Americans weren't chasing a face. They were chasing behavior. The real target was deeper. At 3:28, while one team pinned movement near the vehicle bay, another watched a servant corridor beneath the kitchen wing. A man in a gray prayer coat appeared for less than 4 seconds on a wall camera before the feed cut to static. That wasn't enough for an identity, but it was enough for a decision. At 3:31, the secondary timer began, 22 minutes until the wipe. A hidden system beneath the archive level had powered on. No one outside the facility knew whether it would destroy documents, erase servers, lock doors, or burn the entire chamber. What they didn't know was that Sadeghi had prepared the wipe for his own people, not for the Americans. He trusted machines more than officers, and officers had begun to fail him. In the eastern dormitory, guards moved without discipline. In the western stairwell, radio calls overlapped. Near the underground vehicle ramp, 2 senior aides argued over whether to move the commander or destroy the evidence first. That hesitation became the crack. This wasn't a fortress anymore. It was a room full of men realizing the walls could not save them. At 3:36, the mission window had dropped to 49 minutes. Outside, dust lifted across the southern road. 6 headlights appeared near the dry riverbed. Reinforcements, not many at first. 3 vehicles, then 5, then 9. The secondary clock was no longer theoretical. Underground, a Green Beret sergeant heard the update and said only one word: faster. But faster did not mean reckless. It meant the plan had just become smaller. They weren't there for the compound. They were there for the chief. They weren't there for prisoners. They were there for custody. They weren't there for a firefight. They were there for the thing Tehran could not explain afterward. By 3:39, the facility's own architecture turned against the defenders. The corridors were too narrow for mass movement. The stairwells were too steep for heavy armor. The internal cameras had blind spots because Sadeghi never wanted his private rooms fully monitored. Power flickered once, then again, then half the lower floor went dark. The first missing signal finally resolved. It belonged to a guard detail that intelligence believed was near the main office. They were not there. They were below the archive vault, guarding something that had not appeared on any map. Comment vault if you think the real objective was never the commander alone. At 3:43, Sadeghi's aides tried to move him. That was the midpoint. That was the twist. The target wasn't where he was supposed to be. The official model placed him in the second-floor command suite behind reinforced glass and a coded panic room. But the man in the gray prayer coat was descending, not hiding. He was going underground. The problem wasn't that the intelligence was wrong. The problem was that it was incomplete. There was a second facility beneath the first, a lower chamber with separate power, separate ventilation, and a door so new the concrete around it had not fully cured. At 3:46, the wipe timer hit 7 minutes. Outside, the reinforcement convoy split. At the same time, one American element shifted to delay them without turning the desert into a battlefield. Underground, the custody team reached the lower passage and found fresh paint on the wall. Fresh paint meant recent construction. Recent construction meant recent purpose. And recent purpose meant someone had built this chamber for whatever was inside tonight. What they didn't know was that the black binder had already been moved, not destroyed, moved. At 3:49, the first heavy door opened from the inside. A junior officer stepped out carrying 2 metal cases and a pistol he never raised. Behind him, the chamber lights were still on. Inside stood Sadeghi, 2 aides, 4 guards, and a table covered with cables, paper logs, satellite printouts, and a black binder sealed with red tape. The missing asset was real. The binder was real. And the numbers finally matched. 16 extra bodies were not reinforcements, they were couriers. The facility wasn't just protecting a commander, it was processing a transfer. This wasn't a command post, it was a handoff. Type yes if you would keep watching after a reveal like this, because the next 90 seconds decided whether Tehran could deny everything. At 3:50, Sadeghi did not run. That surprised them. He stood behind the table with the exhausted calm of a man who believed his name itself was armor. One aide reached toward the binder, another looked at the server stack. The guards hesitated because none of them had been trained for a moment where the impossible was already inside the room. That was the mistake. The custody order was clear: alive if possible, documents intact if possible, no speeches, no bargaining, no theater. At 3:51, the wipe sequence reached 59 seconds. The real target was deeper than the man. The real target was what the man had carried across borders without ever touching a border himself. The binder contained shipping codes, proxy payment chains, vessel nicknames, and a list of 12 hardened storage sites marked only by numbers. Beside it, a server rack blinked under emergency power. One screen showed a countdown, another showed a file tree opening and closing faster than a human hand could manage. What they didn't know was that the wipe system had been designed to erase from the outside inward. The archive vault would be last. That gave them less than a minute. At 3:52, the room changed. Sadeghi's senior aide shouted that the Americans were too late. Then the first server went black. Not damaged, not seized, gone. A second screen died, then a third, but the black binder stayed on the table. Paper has no panic switch. Paper does not care about encryption. Paper survives arrogance. And that was what Iran had miscalculated. At 3:53, the binder was secured. At 3:54, Sadeghi was in custody. Not announced, not paraded, not photographed for the world, just removed from the room while the countdown died behind him. They weren't there for a headline, they were there for a hole in Iran's command structure. Outside, the convoy was now less than 8 minutes away. The primary timer showed 31 minutes remaining, but the mission had changed again because the discovery inside the vault was bigger than the target. In the back wall, behind a panel marked as an electrical service hatch, they found a narrow chamber with 6 steel shelves and a plastic map tube. Inside the tube were coastal overlays, port schedules, and red circles around Kasab, Keshem, Bandar Abbas, and 3 unnamed loading points along the Iranian coast. That wasn't the real shock. The shock was the date stamped across the top page. Tomorrow. Share this because the most dangerous part of the mission wasn't the capture. It was what they stopped from happening next. At 3:59, the first defenders realized Sadeghi was gone. The compound reacted like a body losing its spine. Orders contradicted orders. A gate opened when it should have closed. 2 vehicles reversed into each other near the inner road. A commander in the communications annex demanded confirmation from a man who was already in American custody. No one could give it. The numbers didn't match because the operation inside Station 19 had never been defensive. It was outbound. Couriers were waiting to move paper backups before dawn. The missing 4 signals were not dead zones. They were the 4 courier tags intelligence had expected to track later in the week. They had arrived early. That was the unknown variable. At 4:04, the mission window dropped to 21 minutes. At the same time, the reinforcement convoy hit the outer delay zone and slowed, not stopped, slowed. That difference mattered. Every minute gained underground had to be paid for outside. Inside the lower level, a final search found 1 more artifact beneath the table, a handwritten logbook wrapped in oilcloth, no digital signature, no cloud mirror, no password, just names, dates, tonnage estimates, and payment initials. The kind of thing powerful men keep because they do not believe anyone will ever stand close enough to take it. This wasn't intelligence anymore, it was leverage. At 4:08, the second open loop resolved. The facility was larger than expected because the public building was only the cover. The command suite was bait. The real center was beneath it, built for transfers, denials, and last-minute command orders that could survive satellite watching but not human presence. They weren't there for the office, they were there for the room under the room. At 4:13, the final movement began. Sadeghi did not speak until the lower corridor lights flickered again. Then he said one sentence in Farsi that the interpreter would later translate as, "You have no idea what you touched." But they did. That was why they had come. Outside, the convoy lights appeared closer through the dust. Underground, the last Americans moved with the binder, the logbook, and the man Tehran could not admit had been taken from inside one of its own protected sites. At 4:17, Station 19 went fully dark. For 12 seconds, no one moved. Then backup power returned in red. The kind of red that makes every wall look closer. The kind of red that turns every breath into a clock. The primary timer showed 8 minutes. At 4:21, the first reinforcement vehicles reached the outer perimeter and found confusion instead of command. No one knew whether to seal the facility, pursue the attackers, or protect the empty office upstairs. That hesitation was the final American advantage, not speed, not force, confusion. At 4:25, the 74-minute window closed, but the Americans were already beyond the compound belt. Behind them, Station 19 remained standing. That mattered. No crater, no public blast, no easy propaganda image, just missing files, missing logs, missing command authority, and one commander Tehran would spend the next 48 hours pretending had simply vanished into a secure consultation. Not captured, not reclaimed, gone. By sunrise, Iranian state channels said nothing had happened. By noon, 3 regional commanders had been reassigned. By nightfall, port schedules across the strait began changing without explanation. That was the strategic impact. One hidden chamber had exposed a network, one binder had turned rumors into evidence. One custody moment had forced Tehran to wonder who else had been mapped from the inside. Final numbers were cold. Friendly casualties, 0 killed, 2 wounded. Enemy losses, 19 confirmed dead, 34 detained or missing from their posts, and 1 senior IRGC chief removed from the board. Time on ground, 74 minutes from first movement to final exit. Strategic impact, 3 shipment chains disrupted, 12 storage sites compromised, and a command structure forced into emergency silence. Estimated cost of the operation, $18.6 million. Estimated cost to Iran far higher because some losses cannot be measured in money. What they miscalculated was simple. They believed distance was protection. They believed tunnels were secrecy. They believed fear would keep every witness loyal and every record hidden. But fear also makes men keep backups. And backups can be carried out in a black binder at 353. If you want more missions broken down with this level of detail, subscribe right now. Comment Black Binder if you think the real war was never above ground.